Go ahead and get started. The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. I would like to apologize for the temperature in here. Hopefully it will warm up as we proceed with our hearing today. If not, maybe we'll have to go out in the hallway and start dragging people in here to get the body heat, but hopefully we won't have to resort to that. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome members, witnesses, and our guests in the audience of today's hearing. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3O. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the Congressman from Washington, Mr. Bumgardner, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We are here today to hold an oversight hearing titled Sea Lion Predation in the Pacific Northwest. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. This morning, the subcommittee will examine an issue that has only become more challenging in recent years: pinniped predation on threatened and endangered salmon and steelhead, and the conflicting requirements of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. Pinniped refers to a category of marine mammal, including California sea lions, Steller sea lions, and harbor seals, among others. In the decades since the enactment of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, pinniped populations have exploded, and they are dominating ecosystems across the Pacific Northwest and devastating salmon and steelhead populations listed under the Endangered Species Act. The National Marine Fisheries Service has found on repeated occasions over the last 2 decades that pinniped predation is a leading factor in preventing the recovery of these salmon species. One study found that by 2015, across the Pacific coast, pinnipeds consumed 6 times the amount of Chinook salmon that were captured through commercial and recreational fishing combined. The imbalance between unchecked pinniped populations and their threatened and endangered prey causes significant challenges throughout the Pacific Northwest. In today's hearing, we will hear the perspective of tribes that bear the impacts and have led on pinniped management. To address this issue in the Columbia River, Congress enacted bipartisan legislation in 2018 authorizing the Secretary of Commerce to permit the Columbia River tribes and states of Washington, Idaho, and Oregon to conduct lethal take of pinnipeds based on their location in the Columbia River. Today's hearing provides us with an opportunity to examine the law's effectiveness and explore additional solutions to restore the balance between salmon and pinnipeds. The subcommittee is joined today by Asia Dakota, the Executive Director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, who will talk about the Columbia River tribe's experience and implementation of the 2018 statute, the effectiveness of legal take as a management tool to improve salmon abundance, and the considerable resources that our tribes and tribal organizations have devoted to recovering salmon populations. Tribes outside of the Columbia River Basin have also dealt with this issue, from the Oregon coast to the Puget Sound in Washington. I'd like to thank Chairman Ed Johnstone of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission and Chairman Ken Choke of the Nisqually Indian Tribe for joining us today to share their perspectives. Thank you both for being here. It is my hope that today's hearing gives us an opportunity to reflect on lessons learned from previous efforts so that we can craft solutions that effectively bring pinnipeds under control and facilitate the growth of healthy, sustainable salmon and steelhead populations. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for traveling to Washington to be here and their members for their interest in this very important issue. I now recognize Ranking Member Hoyle for her opening statements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here today. This is a very, very important issue, especially representing the Pacific Northwest. We're going to discuss the impacts of sea lion predation on salmon in the Pacific Northwest, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this important issue for my state and this region. In 2018, Congress created a new tool to address the growing problem of sea lions at the Willamette Falls and Bonneville Dam. Sea lions were traveling 100 miles upstream and eating a salmon buffet in areas where they had learned that salmon would be concentrated, and why wouldn't they? But the issue is that their natural predators, orcas, do not travel upstream, and so what they have is a buffet and no natural predators. So ratepayers and the federal government invested billions of dollars to support threatened and endangered salmon, but that work was undermined by sea lions, which were a non-native species, and they learned and adopted a behavior that was devastating to our salmon population. At the time, the MMPA didn't have the necessary flexibility to allow state and tribal fish and wildlife managers to address this population-wide sea lion problem. Section 120F of the Marine Mammal Protection Act allows the states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the tribes on the Columbia River, to get a permit to manage problematic sea lions at key places along the Columbia River and its tributaries. Under this permit, we've seen that targeted management can work. At Oregon's Willamette Falls, removing approximately 20 male sea lions from the area reduced predation on winter steelhead from 25% to just 1.5%. This is a success story, and it shows what's possible with adequate resources and scientific monitoring. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today about the progress they've made using Section 120F authority, the resources they need to build on that success, and how we can keep working together in a bipartisan way to support comprehensive salmon recovery. Now, we can't have this discussion without dealing with the fact that with the massive cuts that would only put salmon in further jeopardy. For instance, the president's proposed budget would eliminate the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund. This is a long-standing and widely supported program that helps improve salmon habitat, provide local jobs and revenue, and supports recreation and tourism opportunities across the Northwest. There's also a proposed 40% cut to the National Marine Fisheries Services and the agency has already lost over 500 staff this year. I do strongly support the work being done on the grounds to address sea lion predation. Anyone who's ever talked to me about salmon knows that. But there are many other threats that we also must deal with. We have to address the habitat challenges, outdated hatchery infrastructure, and climate change in order to truly achieve salmon recovery in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you again to the witnesses for traveling here today to discuss these critical issues for our region, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Hoyle. I now recognize Chairman Westerman for his opening statement.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chair Hageman, for holding this hearing. And I want to thank all the witnesses that have traveled to Washington today to talk about this very important subject, which the topic is a very important one. It's the Pinepid predation undermines decades of work and billions of dollars spent on recovery of threatened and endangered salmon and steelhead. Abundant sea lion and seal populations maintain strict protections under the Marine Mammal Protection Act at the expense of listed fish species. In fact, recent studies have found pinepid predation to be a primary driver of increasing mortality rates of salmon and steelhead in the Salish Sea. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Nisqually tribe in Olympia, Washington, and in my visit, I learned about the tribe's salmon recovery and enhancement efforts and toured the Clear Creek hatchery. I learned about how the tribe wanted to get back to a more traditional diet that included more salmon. And then we took a boat down the river to Puget Sound, where I saw the seal haul-outs, like the one pictured behind me, right at the mouth of the Nisqually and in the flats. While on the river, the seals are unbothered by human activity in their vicinity. These pinepid congregations create unsafe conditions for fishery managers and the public in the vicinity. In a 2024 study, it was found that pinnipeds consume up to 1/3 of the steelhead run in the Nisqually River. These animals jeopardize food security and undermine the tribe's way of life. There's possibly no starker visual than the trackers from the fish hatchery showing up in the seal scat that littered throughout the area. And if I remember the numbers correctly, I think the tribe told me that about 90% of the trackers they put in the fish ended up there in the delta in seal scat, which that I think definitely implies we have a problem. As the Nisqually tribe continues to work to enhance salmon survival, due to the MMPA salmon recovery efforts feed a growing predator population. I want to thank Chairman Choke for joining us today to share his people's story. But the good news is that Congress has previously acted on a bipartisan basis to provide tribes in the region with additional management tools to address increasing pinniped populations. The Endangered Salmon Predation Prevention Act passed in 2018 and authorized the Columbia River tribes in the states of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho to cull these nuisance populations. I want to thank the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission for joining us today to explain how these tools have worked since enactment. Now, we know this issue is not limited to the Columbia River. Today's hearing gives members a chance to examine how this issue has persisted across the region and to explore other potential solutions. With that, Madam Chair, once again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here. I look forward to a robust discussion and look forward to legislation following after we have these hearings, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Huffman for his opening statements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a unanimous consent request. I'd like to enter into the record a recent peer-reviewed paper titled "Climate Change Threatens Chinook Salmon Throughout Their Life Cycle." It is research about increasing sea surface temperatures, changes in river temperatures, altered flow patterns, and other things that are impairing smolt survival, which is really the key
Without
to
objection,
salmon
so
recovery.
ordered.
Thank you. So good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. I want to welcome our witnesses, and I do look forward to hearing from you. Today we are discussing the implementation of Section 120 of the MMPA, which allows lethal removal of sea lions in the Columbia River Basin to support salmon recovery. And predator management, if you really care about declining salmon populations, is one part of the conversation, but it is certainly not the only part or even the biggest part of what we should be talking about. For the past few decades, salmon populations have declined sharply because of habitat loss, because of dam construction, droughts, overharvest, all of these factors leading to multiple listings under the Endangered Species Act. The river system has been reshaped by people. Dams, fish ladders, fish passage bottlenecks, leaving us with very unnatural predator-prey interactions that did not exist historically. And in my district, salmon fishing is a way of life. I care about these things and know all too well about declining salmon populations. California salmon fishing communities have had unprecedented challenges, 3 consecutive ocean salmon season closures. So, Madam Chair, when you give statistics about pinnipeds eating dramatically more salmon than fishermen, you can play with those numbers, because for the past 3 years in places like California, the fleet hasn't been able to catch salmon at all. So it's no surprise that pinnipeds would be eating more than the commercial harvest. At the same time, we're watching real-time recovery of a historic salmon run where we did it right, where tribes, the state, and federal government collaborated on the difficult work of removing Klamath dams. And in a short time since, we have seen salmon return to places they haven't been in over a century. It is working. So I'll be frank, I'm glad Republicans are finally talking about salmon here in this committee today. But if killing even more sea lions than we already allow, and I support the targeted science-based intervention that we allow right now under current authority, but if that's the only thing you'll do for salmon, you're missing it. And we are still in big trouble here. Recovery of Pacific salmon requires habitat recovery and serious partnerships among tribes, states, and the federal government. Republicans have done the opposite. They've applauded the Trump administration for walking away from the Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, a plan that would have delivered more than $1 billion in federal investment over the next decade for wild fish restoration across the basin and clean energy project for tribes. And on top of that, Republicans rescinded IRA funding that would have gone towards salmon and marine mammal research. And they've done nothing to stop DOJ from wreaking havoc at NOAA. I'm glad you're here, Mr. Roush. We should be having a conversation about the fact that you are now the chief cook and bottled washer at this critical agency, and I'm so sorry that your scientists and your actual salmon recovery funding has been gutted under the watch of this administration. House Republicans have put forward a NOAA appropriations bill that guts National Marine Fisheries Service by 40%. And acts as 44% of NOAA's Pacific salmon budget. But today, we hear that they care about salmon, and I just wonder, who do they think they're kidding? You can't champion salmon recovery while slashing the very programs designed to rebuild habitat, recover river function, and uphold tribal rights. You can't walk away from basin-wide restoration agreements and then point to sea lions as the problem. Claiming to care about salmon recovery only when you get to kill off another species is not conservation. I don't know what it is, but it's not serious conservation. My goal today is to hear from our witnesses what is really working and what isn't, and how we can support salmon recovery. It's great to try to avoid extinction, and I do support targeted science-based interventions like what the ranking member mentioned at Willamette Falls. That is going to be necessary in the short term, but we have to think about recovery. And that's an entirely different and I think even more urgent conversation. So I hope today we will ask hard questions, listen to our tribal partners, and ground our decisions in data, addressing root causes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
I will now introduce our first panel of witnesses. Mr. Samuel Rauch, the Deputy Assistant Administrator of the National Marine Fisheries Service in Washington, D.C. Under committee rules, you must limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I now recognize Mr. Rauch for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Hageman, Ranking Member, and members of the Subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present views on seal and sea lion predation on at-risk, threatened, and endangered salmon and steelhead in the Pacific Northwest, as well as the regulatory impacts of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, or the MMPA. I am Sam Rauch, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Regulatory Programs at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I worked at NOAA since 2003. In my role as Deputy Assistant Administrator, I oversee NOAA Fisheries regulatory actions and programs, including those to support the conservation and recovery of marine mammals and endangered species. Thank you for inviting NOAA to testify before you today on this matter pending before the subcommittee. NOAA is responsible for protecting marine mammal populations along the West Coast under the MMPA and for promoting the recovery of many fish, marine mammals, sea turtles, and other species listed as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act, or the ESA. NOAA recognizes that the predation of seals and sea lions, collectively known as pinnipeds, is having a significant negative impact on the recovery of ESA-listed salmon and steelhead fishery stocks in certain areas of the Pacific Northwest. NOAA also recognizes that targeted lethal take of pinnipeds is at times warranted to promote the conservation and recovery of certain stocks of salmonids and other fish. The MMPA contains existing provisions for this purpose, Section 120 and Section 120F. However, as indicated in prior reports and testimonies to Congress, this process, as currently written, has not been particularly effective at achieving the overall goal of balancing the requirements of the ESA and the MMPA. Since 1994, NOAA has issued 12 authorizations pursuant to Section 120 and 120F of the MMPA to intentionally take sea lions. While these permits have helped reduce predation on salmonids at a small scale and in certain areas, they have been ineffective at moving the needle for salmonid recovery coastwide. As it stands, the MMPA does not currently provide regulatory flexibility to states and tribes to directly and more effectively reduce predation on salmonids by pinnipeds in the Pacific Northwest more broadly. NOAA is pleased to report that the MMPA has been a highly successful tool in the recovery of most stocks of seals and sea lions along the West Coast. For example, California sea lions have increased from an abundance of approximately 10,000 animals in the 1950s to approximately 250,000 animals coastwide today. In contrast to robust West Coast seal and sea lion populations, many West Coast salmonid populations are doing poorly. Of 53 distinct population groups of Pacific salmonids, 28 are listed as threatened or endangered under the ESA. Since 2002, California and Stellar sea lions have consumed an estimated 98,000 salmonids just at Bonneville Dam and Willamette Falls, Oregon, which we know represents only a fraction of the total number of salmonids they consume throughout the lower reaches of the Columbia and Willamette rivers. Through the 12 authorizations issued under the MMPA since 1995, states have removed 514 sea lions. 4 of those 12 authorizations were issued to the state of Washington at Ballard Locks, 5 to the states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho at Bonneville Dam, and 1 was issued to the state of Oregon at Willamette Falls. In addition to the MMPA Section 120 authorizations, in 2020, NOAA issued an MMPA Section 120F permit to the states and to 4 Columbia Plateau Treaty Tribes to intentionally take predatory sea lions in the Columbia River Basin. On August 22, 2025, the National Marine Fisheries Service West Coast Region issued states and tribes a new MMPA Section 120F permit to continue to remove sea lions in the Columbia River Basin. While these removals have likely saved more than 110,000 adult salmonids from sea lion predation since the inception of the pinniped removal program, the overall benefit of the program on salmon recovery in the wider Pacific Northwest has been limited. NOAA appreciates being invited to testify before the committee on this issue. We look forward to working further with the committee to achieve the administration's deregulatory priorities outlined in Executive Order 14192, Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation, and Executive Order 14276, Restoring American Seafood Competitiveness. By achieving these priorities, we will rebuild fisheries, support the long-term sustainability of fishing communities, and come up with solutions regarding this matter. Thank you for your time, and I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rauch. And I thank the witness for his testimony. We'll now recognize the members for 5 minutes each for questions. I'm going to begin with myself. Mr. Rauch, in your testimony, you state that the California sea lion population across the Pacific coast has increased from approximately 10,000 animals in the 1950s to roughly 250,000 today. Are pinniped populations in the Pacific Northwest at sustainable levels?
Thank you for the question. Yes, they are. The California sea lion population is around 260,000, which is within their optimal sustainable population, the standard for a healthy population under the MMPA. The eastern stellar sea lion population is at around 78,000, also within their optimal sustainable populations.
So have the 120F removals threatened the sustainability of pinniped populations on the West Coast?
We do not believe so. As I indicated, we've only authorized in the hundreds, and there are tens of thousands of the sea lions around and seals around the West Coast.
NOAA's 2022 5-year review for several salmon species along the Columbia River noted an overall increase in pinniped predation of Pacific salmon and steelhead. How has pinniped predation impacted NOAA's efforts to recover the ESA-listed salmon species?
Pinniped predation is clearly a factor that is limiting recovery of the salmon stocks. It is not the only factor. There are many factors, but it is one of them, and we can measure in places like the Columbia River where we have seen improvements in predation. Predation's gone down. We've seen increases in salmon runs, which have improved their extinction outlook. They are in better shape because of the predation efforts that we've taken.
Well, in terms of the numbers of pinnipeds that have been killed pursuant to this program, do you think we could increase that number?
We look at that number based on a scientific assessment of the potential biological removal. The potential biological removal for California sea lions is about 14,000 a year, and we're in the hundreds. For eastern stellar sea lions, it's about 2,000 a year, and we're well below that in terms of what we've authorized to date. The current 120F targeted program in the Columbia caps the removals at 10% of the potential biological removal rate. So you take the potential biological removal and go down to 10% of that, and that is what Congress has authorized to be removed in the Columbia, and that has been a successful program.
Do you think we need to change that number?
the administration has no position on whether we need to change that or not. I do think that that number is still well below the potential biological removal.
Okay, so we could increase it above the 10%, and we would still retain a sustainable population of pinnipeds in the Pacific Northwest?
I think that is likely, yes.
Okay. Do you have a specific number? The witnesses on our second panel will talk about the relationship that the tribes in the Pacific Northwest have with NOAA in working through these issues. What do you think NOAA could more effectively do to partner with the tribes to control the pinniped populations? Do you have some additional ideas?
We very much value our partnership with the sovereign Pacific Northwest tribes. We have been partnering with them on many issues for decades, as long as the National Marine Fisheries Service has been an entity. They have a long history, even well before European civilization came, of managing their own natural resources well. We try to provide within our authorities support for their efforts and to work closely with them. As indicated on the Columbia, we've taken advantage of the congressional authority given and partnered with them to issue a permit that we believe has been successful within the Columbia. We have not been able to do that in the rest of the Northwest because there's no authority to issue a similar permit at the moment. But we have been working with them on preparing if that were to become an eventuality.
Do you have any particular ideas of how to improve this situation from the standpoint of better protecting the salmon species?
The administration has no particular view on this, but if Congress were interested in more flexibilities, Congress could look to the Columbia River provision that it has already passed and implement that more broadly. We think that that has been a successful program on the Columbia.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I appreciate your comments and your insight in that regard, and I think that there's definitely some interest among the members of providing additional resources and additional tools to address this situation. I now will go to Ranking Member Hoyle for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. And first, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent that both Representative Anna Lee Randall and Representative Glusenkamp-Perez of Washington have permission to sit in on the dais and participate in today's hearing.
Without objection, so ordered.
And Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter to the record statements from the Fish and Wildlife Departments of the states of Oregon and Washington.
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay, and first, I want to make it clear. I believe that the California sea lions and pinniped overpopulation problem is severely impacting our salmon population, and I would love to see us have a scientifically based approach to culling that population, as they have no natural predators to control a population that is truly upsetting the balance in our ecological systems and wildlife. So, having said that, I am very concerned that staff and programmatic cuts at NOAA are affecting hatchery operations, tribal coordination, and the ability of scientists to successfully carry out programs like Section 120F. NOAA we have not even reached the 10% allowed culling rate of pinnipeds because, apparently, of staff cuts. Now, I have specifically heard that tribal co-managers and state hatchery operators lost communication access with NOAA staff after a round of layoffs in February. Can you explain how NOAA is working to ensure its responsibilities under Section 120F of part of the MMPA are still being fulfilled?
Thank you for the question. 120F does allow us to issue a permit to the states and the tribes, and they carry out the activities. We coordinate with them. We do fund some of their work, I believe, for the years 2023 going into 2027. We have funded about $1.4 million annually, and that's currently the proposal to support them. I think that their work on that is more than that, but that is the federal contribution through the states on that. So we do continue to work with them, and we continue to outreach to them in support of this program.
So, Mr. Rao, specifically, I have heard tribal co-managers and state hatchery operators lost communication access with NOAA staff after a round of layoffs in February. Can you explain how NOAA is working to ensure its responsibilities under Section 120F are still being fulfilled, and what, if anything, is being done to ensure, after drastic layoffs, that the people who are doing the work, whether it's contracted or it's done by the agency, how that work is being fulfilled and how communications are happening?
We do have a tribal coordinator in our West Coast Regional Office, and I speak repeatedly with our West Coast Regional Administrator, both of which reach out to the tribes on a constant basis. So if there are communication problems, I encourage the tribes to reach out to one of those people, and we will try to correct that.
So if I follow up with you with these specific examples, can we get some answers and coordination?
We're happy to take that back.
Thank you. So the MMPA requires NOAA to calculate potential biological removal levels to authorize any legal take. Without staff to carry out the research or monitoring, how will NMFS fulfill the statutory requirement?
We constantly work on the annualized stock assessment process. We don't do I shouldn't say annual, we do a stock assessment periodically for various stocks around the coast under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. We continue to do that. We continue to prioritize those stocks as resources allow.
Okay. So, and then finally, the House CJS bill cuts funding for NOAA's Pacific Salmon ESA work by 44%. What activities will NOAA no longer carry out? And are any of these activities part of NOAA's treaty and trust responsibility to our tribes? And you can get back to me if there isn't time.
Thank you. Yes, that would probably be best. We will get back to you on that.
And I'd like to know specifically what activities will not be carried out. And again, thank you for your work and for being here today.
Thank you for the question. We'll get back to you.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Malloy for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Rauch, thank you for being here. I am a congresswoman from Utah, and just in case you've never looked at a map of the United States, Utah is a long way from the ocean, and it's a really dry state. I'm fairly confident we don't have any pinnipeds in Utah, and I just learned the term salmonids preparing for this hearing. So a lot of this is new to me and not necessarily an issue that we deal with in my state. And I don't even like to eat fish, so I'm here as a disinterested party, but I do understand that regulations have a way of taking on a life of their own, and they tend to live forever, and sometimes we lose track of what the purpose was of the regulation, and we keep regulating for the sake of the regulation. So my first question for you is, from your position, what would you like to see Congress doing legislatively to allow efficient management of pinnipeds and salmonids so that we can recover the fish species we need and have healthy populations and work efficiently between the federal government, the state, and the tribes?
Thank you for the question. The administration has taken no position on whether the Congress should amend this statute or not. But in prior testimony, prior positions, we have indicated that the current structure outside of the Columbia River Basin, the 120 program, which is the broader program, is cumbersome and difficult to work with, and it does not allow the tribes to apply for a permit on their own. It requires you to individually identify the bad acting sea lions. So they have to mark the sea lions, and basically the sea lions have to return before they can be removed, which is a cumbersome process. That does not, Congress has exempted the Columbia River from that process. There also needs to be a finding that the individual sea lions are in and of themselves causing a population level impact, which is a difficult burden to meet. So the program on the Columbia, which does not have those three elements, has been more effective. The tribes have been able to participate. We've been able to, with the tribes and the states, been able to remove sea lions and seen some positive benefits to salmon, which has not been the case elsewhere.
Thank you. You actually already answered my second and third questions, which were, was it necessary to make sure that a specific individual sea lion is predating on salmon? It seems like we've already pretty firmly established that sea lions like to eat salmonids. Feels like we could make them guilty by association, and whether extending that authority would be helpful, and you answered both of them, so I will return my last 2 minutes, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez for 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the chairwoman and the ranking member for holding this important hearing and for granting me the opportunity to speak on this issue. So I live right above the Columbia River in southwest Washington, just above the Bonneville Dam, and I have seen and heard firsthand how much work goes into managing sea lion populations and preserving local fisheries and tributaries. As the name implies, sea lions are a species that belong in the sea, not in our rivers. A sea lion is not a small creature. For scale, please note the Toyota Corolla. A stellar sea lion is 11 feet long and 2,500 pounds. These are behemoths, and Toyota Corolla 15 feet and 3,000 pounds. And when Congress amended the Marine Mammal Protection Act to expand lethal removal authorities, it provided that eligible managers along the Columbia River could remove up to 450 California sea lions and 176 stellar sea lions during the 5-year life of the take permit. Yet we have only seen our managers come close to these max. We haven't even seen them come close to reaching these levels. In 2024, only 27 California and 21 stellar sea lions were removed at Bonneville Dam. As of July this year, only 26 and 11 have been removed. Ask yourself, why are these numbers so small? The arduous process of removal is a key feature. I'm concerned that the factors contributing to this severe utilization, namely the cost and the onerous back and forth of trapping the creature, identifying its threat, shaking a can of pennies at it, retrapping, and then finally darting, contribute heavily. We've done some back-of-the-envelope math to try and determine the cost to remove sea lions under the permit. From our estimates, it costs over $38,000 per removal. From the Columbia River. That's roughly $203 per salmon saved in state and taxpayer federal dollars. I was successful in including language in the FY26 Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations report that passed out of committee that would direct your agency to conduct a study on the most effective strategies for pinniped removal, considering factors such as animal health and cost. So my question to you, Mr. Rock, could you tell me more about what NOAA is actively doing to ensure that current pinniped removal strategies are the most effective, and if direct kill strategies are being considered?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, the current permits, as you indicate, do authorize direct mortality removals, and we do think that in the Pacific Northwest for these species, that is the most effective way. We have tried over the years to employ non-lethal removals. We have moved them hundreds of miles away, and they do come back.
Faster than the people taking them out.
Perhaps. They do come back. They are remarkably resilient, and they do know where their food source is. It is very difficult to encourage them to leave with anything less than force. At one point, we did try to find space in zoos and aquariums, but that rapidly filled up. So there is no, in our opinion, currently a better way to address predation other than lethal removal.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight. Has NOAA looked into the potential challenges to removal efficacy posed by current permit requirements, such as the requirement for the sea lion to be individually identified and observed eating fish before they can be removed?
I think we have said in prior testimony, and I indicated earlier today, that is a very cumbersome provision that does not exist currently on the Columbia River, and it makes the Columbia River, because they don't have to do that, that is a more effective program.
And yet, I think we're seeing that we're still not able to exercise those permits. And I would say to my fellow committee members, you know, this is local lore. This is one of the things I hear about all the time. I don't have air conditioning in my elementary schools, and to see the cost and expense gone through and the levels of ologists we have to go through to protect our our reliance on salmon. It's well known, and in living memory, there are people in my family who lived because their daddies were good fishermen, and we're very concerned at the lack of efficacy of the current removal process. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Well, I sure hope we can figure out a way to fix it. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rauch, for your testimony. And also, paying attention to the questions you've already answered. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said that we could remove 14,000 sea lions per year and still have a sustainable population, or did I misunderstand that?
Thank you for your question. Yes, the Marine Mammal Protection Act requires us to assess the optimal sustainable population and the potential biological removal, which is how many sea lions or whatever that species is you can remove and still have that sustainable population.
And that number is 14,000.
For California sea lions, it is 14,000. For the stellar sea lions, it is 2,000.
Okay, but the law limits that to 10% of that number, so that would be 1,400 or 1,600 if you were to add them all together.
I'm not great at math, but yes, the current 120F does limit what we can authorize to 10% of that potential biological removal rate.
So if I'm reading the data correctly, over the past 5 years, we've removed like 229.
We have not come close to that level.
And that's a very conservative number when you look at 10% being the limit. But also, I believe your testimony notes that the current 120F removals have saved more than 110,000 adult fish. So the potential to save more fish is in the millions while maintaining a sustainable level of sea lions. Is that correct?
There is there are only so many sea lions you can remove that are actually causing the predation. I think one of the testimonies was the predation went down to 1%. So at some point you run out of sea lions. There, not coastwide. There's plenty of sea lions, but you would run out of sea lions that are preying on the fish at the locks. But there is a potential, the more that you remove, we do see improvements in survival.
I know you had mentioned that the goal of balancing the requirements between ESA and MMPA would require more regulatory flexibility.
If at the moment we cannot implement a similar program to the program on the Columbia elsewhere in the region, because 120, which is the authority Congress has given us elsewhere, does require us to have individually identifiable sea lions. We've got to determine that those sea lions themselves are having a negative impact on the population. And we cannot partner with the tribes directly in order to take advantage of their historical ability to manage the populations.
So in NOAA's view, would expanded authority for lethal management of pinnipeds coast-wide likely have a positive impact on salmon recovery and abundance?
If Congress were to choose to do that, I do think that would improve salmon recovery and abundance coastwide.
So what data gaps exist today in the Columbia River to guide fishery managers and policymakers to identify the best strategies for pinniped management throughout the whole region?
It is very difficult. There are numbers of different salmon stocks. So the Columbia River stocks are not the same as the Puget Sound stocks. So you need to understand the local impacts on those stocks. And the pinniped populations are also not uniformly measured. There are a lot of them, but to identify, at the moment, to identify whether or not the removals in one particular river, like somebody said, the Nisqually, whether that would be having a population level effect on the whole sea lion population is something we are not currently resourced to assess. So those kind of levels, because the requirement is that you have to tie individual sea lions to population effects, that requires a degree of scientific research that we have not been able to provide.
And what's the limitation on being able to provide that research?
We have not had the funding, and given that there is not an authorized partner to manage at that local level, there's not the resources to do that.
So in my travels in the Pacific Northwest, every time I go out and I visit with people about salmon, I'm nearly always talking with tribes who seem to have a really good grasp of what needs to happen. They're doing great work in that area. Is there a way for NOAA and tribes to partner better on these issues?
We do. We would agree with your assessment of the important works that tribes do now and have historically done throughout time immemorial on these stocks. There are always better opportunities to partner. We try to partner with them to the extent that we can. We cannot partner with them directly on sea lion removal outside of the Columbia because we don't have that authority currently to do that.
Thank you. Good exchange of information there. The chair now recognizes Mr. Neguse for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity. Certainly an interesting and important topic, and am grateful for the committee chairwoman and ranking member's decision to hold this hearing. Mr. Oak, I wanted to ask you some questions on perhaps a different topic, but nonetheless very important to my district in Colorado, and I think to the future of our country. Just want to baseline, kind of understand your background. Of course, congratulations on your position now. My understanding is that prior to your current role, that you previously worked at the Department of Justice?
That was some years ago.
Yes, sir.
In the 90s.
Correct, as a trial attorney, and I believe at some point as an assistant section chief at the Department of Justice, and you've received many accolades, I think both within DOJ and the Department of Commerce. Given that experience, I suspect you are more familiar than most with the organic statutes that create and authorize different programs that are implemented at NOAA. Fair to say?
I am familiar with the fisheries statutes, the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation Management Act, the MMPA that we've talked about here, the Endangered Species Act. There are other statutes that affect other parts of NOAA that I do not have familiarity with.
Sure. Well, let's stick with fisheries, just by way of example, because I think you've attested that that's where your expertise is centered. I presume you'd agree with me that your department, your division, would be unable to reorganize wide swaths of the fisheries programs that you implement, provided those have been created, authorized by federal statute. You would not, NOAA wouldn't be able to proceed with, for example, eliminating whole cloth those programs. Is that a fair assessment?
That sounds to me like you're asking a question well beyond my capability to answer. I am no longer an attorney for the United States government, and I do not know the full breadth and scope of what authorities might be available to do that.
Okay, fair enough. The reason why I asked that question, you are a senior high-ranking official at NOAA. We rarely get opportunities to question and have dialogue with folks at the Department of Commerce these days. As you know, there's certainly been public reporting, we don't have much visibility into the details, that there are massive reorganization plans that the Department of Commerce has proposed specifically for NOAA. And those reorganization plans, at least based on public reporting that we've seen, suggest that several core programs administered by NOAA could be eliminated entirely, which would be plainly violative of federal law. And we've seen that play out, that episode, over the course of the last several months in other departments, most prominently the Department of Health and Human Services, which is mired in litigation on this precise point. I represent multiple NOAA installations in Colorado. I don't know if you've had an opportunity during your long career to visit Boulder and to visit the facility there. Perhaps you have.
About 20 years ago, sir.
20 years ago, yes, sir. So, well, we welcome you back. These are your compatriots, hardworking federal civil servants doing important work that has been statutorily authorized and funded by the United States Congress. And so I guess I would offer, insofar as you are willing to relay back to your colleagues at headquarters here in Washington or in Maryland, that it matters a great deal that the Department of Commerce follow the law. And I do not believe that the department has the authority to eliminate programs that have been authorized by Congress. The Ocean Acidification Program, the Earth Prediction Innovation Center, otherwise known as EPIC, the National Sea Grant College Program. These are all programs that Congress has authorized by law on a bipartisan basis, and there are hardworking civil servants, your colleagues at NOAA, back in Boulder, in Colorado, and across the country, who are responsible for implementing these programs, as well as the cooperative institutes that have also been authorized by Congress. And I just would encourage you to go back to your colleagues, as I said, at headquarters to make the case that there are certainly many of us in Congress who are watching this very closely and who expect the department to follow the law. So you're welcome to respond to that, but I would just, I'm not trying to, kind of get you into a gotcha question here or anything like that. I just want, it's important for me, given the limited exposure that we have to officials at the Department of Commerce these days, to be able to relay that to you.
I'd be happy to relay those views back to them.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair now recognizes Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for appearing with us, Mr. Raj. So we have in California the listed winter run Chinook salmon and the spring run Chinook salmon under the ESA. So that's requiring more cold water to be held in Shasta Dam for future releases to ostensibly help the fish, mostly in the fall. This water otherwise could be used to help towns and farms across the state, as we've seen tremendous water cuts affecting the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley in recent years. Sometimes maintaining the water can result also in flood releases during the winter and spring, as they have to leave space for flood control. So the water you didn't get to use during the summer in previous crop years, for example, kept the dam too full at the time they have to have their buffer zone for flood control in the year. So that means the water got wasted, not being able to use it because they had to keep the lake deeper. When the water is released from Shasta for the benefit of salmon, it may not always be able to be used by constituents down the line because of the timing I mentioned here, because if you're releasing it in the fall, then that can't go to agriculture. Agriculture's season is pretty much over with by then. So it may not be needed for anything else other than to try and drive the temperature of the river down by 1 degree, and that's going to be the be-all, end-all to help the fish population. 1 degree colder water in the river. Meanwhile, a bigger and bigger zone behind the dam is now unusable water for anybody else. Other regulatory restrictions can prevent this water from being exported from the delta farther down into the Central Valley via the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project conveyance canals. So instead, it rushes on out to the delta, through the delta. So what we see, though, is that salmon populations continue to decline despite all this new water over the last 30 years being pushed through there because of predatory fish, because of actually the environmental issues that not get talked about enough of Bay Area cities releasing effluent into the delta, causing algae and lack of oxygenation and all that. So we do happen to have 2 fish hatcheries, the Livingston Stone National Fish Hatchery and the Coleman National Fish Hatchery, which spawn Chinook salmon to help bolster the populations without having to do more stored water in Shasta that isn't usable for other purposes. So these help augment fish populations, especially during multi-year droughts, which is what these dams were created for, was to survive 5 years of drought. They don't anymore. So that more Shasta water can actually be put to human use, such as growing food, instead of importing more and more crops, like in my Ag Committee briefing today, more and more is coming from Mexico and other places like that. So both of these hatcheries are in the process of being modernized. So Mr. Raj, I'm wondering, do you see that the improvements are critical to supporting the salmon production that would help the population? How will NIMFS and NOAA, et cetera, ensure its permitting decisions for these upgrades are timely, predictable, and aligned with the reclamation's investment schedule? Will permitting hold this up for a needless extra amount of time?
Thank you for the questions. We do think that these 2 hatcheries are important for the long-term health of the populations. We have been working closely with the Department of Interior, who are the operating agencies of these facilities, and we are committed to working with them within their permitting schedule, their processing schedule. Do
they have any urgency on getting these projects done speedily or getting through the permit process quickly or expeditiously?
I cannot speak for the Department of Interior. We are committed to working quickly with them within their schedules.
Okay, all right, so, would you support alternate delivery mechanisms such as non-federal partners to help carry out design, environmental work, or portions of the construction to expedite these upgrades and make these a stronger, more viable pair of hatcheries?
I can't speak for Interior, but we have seen many projects across the country where including non-federal partners have made the projects more successful.
So you do feel urgency to at least at some level try and speed these up and have it?
We will work within the bounds that try to meet the schedules that Interior has given us, and we will try to do that as quickly as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Up on the Klamath River, NOAA and NIMFS are looking at what the Klamath water users are dealing with up there. What they have is studies on fish flows that are over 20 years and very limited to water going only for fish and not agriculture, which has been devastated for the last 20-plus years with that. Is it possible that we could have a consultation that revisits actual best and latest science, not 20-plus-year-old studies on fish needs for all types of fish, and really when it's the coho that has been the focus?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I know that Interior, once again, is considering reinitiating consultation there. If we do that, we are both statutorily committed to using the best available science, and as you know, the President has indicated we should only be implementing gold standard science. So we would be looking for the best science that we possibly can to apply to any revisited consultation that Reclamation would ask for.
And farmers have urgency to get their 26 crop season planned and 27, et cetera. Can we give them assurance that they know what they can plant, how much water they'll have available in 26 or 27?
Reclamation controls the water delivery, but we are trying to ensure that the National Marine Fisheries Service is not an impediment in terms of scheduling any of that process.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I want to thank the witness for your testimony today and for the members and their questioning. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witness, and we will ask that you respond to those in writing. So I believe that you're going to be dismissed at this point, and while the clerk is resetting the table, I will introduce our second panel of witnesses. Again, Mr. Rock, thank you for coming today. Ms. Asia Dakota, the Executive Director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission in Portland, Oregon. Mr. Ed Johnstone, the Chairman of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission from Olympia, Washington. And Mr. Larry Phillips, the Pacific Fisheries Policy Director of the American Sport Fishing Association from Olympia, Washington. And the Honorable Ken Choke, the Chairman of the Nisqually Indian Tribe from Olympia, Washington. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and again, we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. I now recognize Ms. Dakota for 5 minutes. And have I said your name correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. I now recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Hoyle, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to share our experiences confronting marine mammal predation on salmonid populations in the Columbia River. I'm Asia Dakota, a citizen of the Yakama Nation and the Executive Director for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. We are a governmental subdivision of 4 treaty tribes, the Yakama, Warm Springs, Umatilla, and Nez Perce. Collectively, our tribes and CRITFIC carry out one of the largest tribally led fishery programs in the United States, working across an area larger than Florida. Increased presence of California sea lions, stellar sea lions, and harbor seals within the lower Columbia River are severely impacting our region's salmon conservation efforts. Historically, our elders remember an occasional sea lion reaching Celilo Falls. However, these occurrences were rare. Now, a combination of hydrosystem infrastructure, changing environmental conditions, and the success of the Marine Mammal Protection Act has resulted in unprecedented numbers of sea lions in the Columbia River. Starting in the early 2000s, sea lion numbers began to climb as they learned to use river bottlenecks to consume returning salmon and steelhead, including 13 ESA-listed stocks. These sea lions have not only returned each year, but they are teaching their offspring and others this behavior. Dealing with this problem wasn't straightforward, as sea lions are protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Section 120 of this act allows for lethal removal of nuisance marine animals, but only as a last resort after non-lethal methods have failed. This stringent requirement was meant to maintain the Act's core mission of sustaining healthy marine mammal populations, but it made effectively managing this abnormal situation in the lower Columbia River impossible. Initially, we worked with MMPA-allowed constraints using non-lethal deterrents such as hazing, acoustic devices, trapping and locating, and exclusion devices, with only mixed success, as resources only allowed 6 to 8 hours a day to address a round-the-clock problem. Despite our efforts, predation rates more than doubled between 2006 and 2015, and it was clear that a strong solution was required. With bipartisan support, the Endangered Salmon Predation Prevention Act was signed into law in 2018, amending Section 120 of the MMPA to enable NOAA to issue permits to Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and the 4 treaty tribes to lethally take sea lions in a limited portion of the Columbia River with the intention of protecting ESA-listed salmon species. After 6 years, I'm pleased to report that the impact of this amendment has been dramatic. After removing 30 sea lions at Willamette Falls, winter steelhead losses from the pinniped predation went from 25% to just under 2%. At Bonneville Dam, despite the challenges from its larger area and greater number of sea lions, targeted removals have led to a 91% decrease in sea lion days and significant reductions in predation. The permit was recently extended through August 2030. Despite the culls that have taken place since 2018, this effort has had no measurable impact on the overall sea lion population. Thanks to the MMPA, California sea lions number approximately 275,000 and are at or near carrying capacity, well beyond the optimal sustainable population level that NOAA developed. I urge Congress to prioritize the following actions: sustain funding to maintain and expand removal programs at Bonneville Dam and Willamette Falls, amend the MMPA to extend area-based management authorities into the lower Columbia River, request NOAA to assess current management options and provide a roadmap for effective strategies, support expanded monitoring as sea lion behavior changes, invest in technology to prevent sea lions from moving upstream past the estuary, and lastly, support research and development of innovative non-lethal deterrents. While sea lion predation on adult salmonids and smolts is significant, I must emphasize the need for a holistic approach to predation management overall, addressing avian, piscivorous, and marine mammal predation collectively. Protecting salmonid populations is vital for the ecological health of our rivers and the cultural and economic well-being of our communities. Finally, I want to let the committee know that our tribes and the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission do not take lethal removals lightly or as the preferred option. We don't want to be in the business of managing Pacific marine mammal populations into perpetuity. Lethal removals of animals with this learned behavior will minimize predation now and prevent new sea lions from establishing this pattern into the future. We are very much aligned with our state co-managers in this goal. Thank you for your time and consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for your recommendations. I now recognize Mr. John Stone for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member and the committee for this opportunity to speak before you on this important issue. I am a Quinault Indian and was born a Treaty Indian. I'm one of the elders that she speaks about that can speak from the time that I can remember in the late 50s and early 60s where sea lions were very rare to observe. The Northwest Indian Fish Commission is comprised of the 20 treaty tribes organized shortly after the decision known as United States versus Washington from 5 treaty areas we signed in 1854 and 1855. It's with that background that I speak to you that our ancestors lived this life, and it was brought to me when I was born and I lived on this coast. And listening to your opening remarks are very powerful. Listening to what we hear from Noah gives me hope that I'm here to speak for the 20-member tribes policy as directed, and we've looked at this issue for a long time. And in our written testimony, you'll see some of that story where the Muckleshoots dealt with the sea lion called Herschel at the locks and going into Lake Washington. And that sea lion was numbered and then taken somewhere, and it almost beats them home, right? No more steelhead whatsoever in the Lake Washington into the tributaries where the Muckleshoots and other tribes fish. This problem needs to be an ecosystem-based approach, needs the legislative fix and administrative fix to engage in a process of this meeting and other meetings that our member tribes and our leadership are definitely on board with, where we can meet, when we can meet, and we get results of the testimonies that you're hearing. So we've developed this policy given these limitations that we have been faced with. When you hear the dynamics of 250, 275,000, 300,000 California sea lions, they're not only eating the adults, they're eating the outmigrants. In a world where there's no more spring runoff and the glaciers are no longer there, that milkies the water that helps those smolts go out to the sea, because our glaciers are going and they're gone. Snow is not reliable. Those kinds of things that we had as protections in the past are no longer available. Our adults are dying pre-spawn because the rivers are too low. They're out of oxygen, and we're out of, and we're facing those kinds of challenges. So it's a vast approach that we need to think about as we tackle this issue, because as the sea lion population grows, those fish that they rely on, no matter where they're from or where they're going, they used to be that Southern Oregon, Northern California, Central Valley large populations that kept them. Now that they've grown so large, the young bulls are ostracized and they have to go out and they have to make a living. They're making a living in Grace Harbor, where the haul-outs and the docks are full of these sea lions. Or they're at the mouth of the Nisqually, where there's 200 or 300 rafted up, waiting for those stocks. We're about working through this system with all of these folks that are coming to call out all these reasons why we're being put out of business. They eat 60 pounds a day times 250,000. You get to what, a million and a quarter pounds a day of fish stocks that are diminishing. At some point, the natural order will take over. They're out of business, we're out of business. We encourage and are encouraged by the words we heard. We're ready to do the job, to meet wherever and whenever we can. We think that two-pronged approach and ecosystem base is a positive way to go. I've had to kind of change up the script. You have a written testimony that we've advanced. We're here. We're engaged. We look forward to the opportunity of working this. So my grandchildren and my grandchildren's children knows the life ways of our people as Indian people. As they go, we go. The salmon. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Johnstone. The chair now recognizes Mr. Phillips for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chair Hagman, Ranking Member Hoyle and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for an opportunity to testify today. My name is Larry Phillips, and I serve as the Pacific Fisheries Policy Director for the American Sport Fishing Association, or ASA. ASA represents the country's recreational fishing industry and many businesses whose livelihoods depend on healthy salmon and steelhead runs across the Pacific Northwest. Recreational fishing is part of the identity of the region. From Puget Sound to the Columbia River Basin and along the coasts of Washington and Oregon, salmon seasons support thousands of jobs, strengthen local economies, and carry forward cultural and family traditions. Nationwide, recreational fishing contributes more than $130 billion annually, and anglers directly invest nearly $2 billion a year into conservation. For decades, federal, state, and tribal partners, as well as anglers, have invested heavily in salmon recovery through habitat restoration, hatchery modernization, harvest reform, and hydropower mitigation. But for one major factor continues to erode these gains, pinniped predation on salmon and steelhead. Today's pinniped populations are healthy, fully protected, and significantly larger than when systematic surveys began in the 1970s following the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. While we can't precisely quantify pre-contact abundance, science shows that these populations have rebounded dramatically in the modern era, and many stocks are at or above optimum sustainable population levels. The recovery is a conservation success, but it also means that predation pressure on salmon has grown far beyond what recovery efforts were designed to absorb. In the Columbia River, sea lions that were nearly absent in the 1990s can consume a significant portion, and estimated as high as 40% of the spring Chinook return in a single season. Thanks to the leadership of Senator Reich, Senator Cantwell, Representative Newhouse, and others, the 2018 Endangered Salmon Predation Prevention Act provided targeted tools, and early results showed improved salmon survival. But the MMPA still prevents meaningful actions in many areas where predation is most acute. In Puget Sound, harbor seals consume 6 to 14% of juvenile Chinook annually, and as much as 1/3 of the steelhead smolts in certain estuaries. Along the Washington coast, Steller sea lions can consume more than 2 million juvenile Chinook annually. These losses undo gains made through habitat restoration, hatchery reform, and harvest constraints. And outside the Columbia River, managers lack the workable path under current law to intervene. I want to acknowledge that this is a polarizing and emotional topic. Pinnipeds are an important part of the ecosystem, and their recovery is a real success story of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. We also appreciate the thoughtful, science-driven work already being done by federal, state, and tribal managers, often under very limited authority. And our goal is not to diminish those efforts, but to ensure managers have a balanced tool needed to conserve both salmon and pinnipeds. To support the recovery, ASA urges Congress to consider several targeted science-based updates to the MMPA. First, create a streamlined pathway for managing predatory pinnipeds in Puget Sound and along the Washington and Oregon coast by expanding location-based approach in Section 120F. Second, extend management authority to predation hotspots, including Puget Sound and both our coasts. Third, provide dedicated federal funding to support monitoring, removals, and ongoing scientific analysis. Fourth, extend MMPA management authority to Washington's treaty tribes and work collaboratively with Oregon's tribal governments. Finally, pinniped management must complement, not replace, investments in habitat, hatcheries, hydropower mitigation, and harvest reform. But we must also be honest. Continuing to spend billions on recovery and continually restricting fisheries without meaningfully addressing predation will produce a predictable outcome that will not result in recovery. The sport fishing community cares deeply about conservation. We want future generations to fish for salmon across the Northwest. To achieve that, we must address all limiting factors, including marine mammal predation. I thank you for your time and continued leadership, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. The chair now recognizes Chairman Choke for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chairwoman Hagman, Chairman Westerman, and Ranking Member Hoyle, and members of the subcommittee. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak today. My name is Ken Choke. I am the current chairman of the Nisqually Indian Tribe. Before I begin, I want to thank Chairman Westerman for coming to Nisqually Reservation and seeing firsthand what the Pennapedes are doing to our fisheries. My people signed the Treaty of Medicine Creek in 1854, which confirmed, not granted, our right to fish at our usual and accustomed places. The right has been upheld again and again by federal courts, including the 1974 Bolt decision. I am here today because of the treaty rights being undetermined by unchecked Pennapede predations in the Puget Sound. Simply put, if salmon cannot survive long enough to reach our nets and our spawning grounds, then our treaty rights becomes empty promise. Our people have lived along the Nisqually River since time immemorial. Salmon are not just a food source for us. They are the heart of our culture, our economy, and our identity. But today, too often, our fisheries are closed because too few fish return home to sustain the runs. Over the past several decades, our Chinook, chum, steelhead populations have fallen to deeply troubling levels, many now listed under the Endangered Species Act. During these same years, harbor seals and sea lions members have grown dramatically under the protection of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, simply known as MMPA. This has been successful in recovering marine mammals, but it is not designed for the ecological realities we see today, where predator numbers have far outpaced the ability of depressed salmon runs to withstand them. In 2022, the Washington State Academy of Sciences stated Pennaped predation impeding salmon recovery, and the strategic removal may be necessary to address these impacts. Yet the current MMPA structures makes meaningful science-based management nearly impossible. Tribes and state managers are left watching salmon disappear while our tools stay locked behind the federal process. In the Nisqually Estuary and across the South Puget Sound, our biologists as well as the state and federal partners have documented high rates of predation of the both juvenile and the adult salmon, wild and hatchery alike. Seals and sea lions concentrate at the river's mouth, the ferries, the docks, and other choke points. Some even learn to target our fishery gear directly. For the ESA-listed Chinook and steelhead, losing even a small number of the adults or smolts can erase years of recovery efforts. Let me be clear, the Nisqually tribe has done everything we can to help save our salmon. We restored over 900 acres of our estuary habitat, one of the largest such projects on the West Coast. We have limited or closed our own fisheries. We operate hatcheries. We co-manage harvest based on rigorous science. We work with NOAA, WDFW, and partner tribes, such as the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, on long-term monitoring, tagging, predation, research, and climate resilience. But we cannot resolve the salmon alone. When predation removes a significant share of the population before it's ever returns to the river, for us, it impacts are not abstract. They mean fewer fish reaching the spawning grounds, fewer hatchery adults for treaty and non-treaty harvests, and most closures, even when the tribes are not the source of the decline. And they mean an erosion of our culture, our youth, losing the opportunity to learn who they are through fishing. When federal law protects abundant species so rigidly that it eliminates another species, and in doing so eliminates the reserved tribal treaty right. The federal trust responsibility is not being fulfilled. We are not asking for the elimination of the seals or sea lions. We respect them as a part of the ecosystem. What we are asking for is a balance. We urge Congress to modernize the MMPA to allow timely, science-based action where predation threatens ESA-listed salmon and treaty fisheries, to streamline the Section 120 process, to support long-term predation research and tribal-led management, and to reinforce the federal trust responsibility so our right to fish remains meaningful and not symbolic. For the Nisqually people, salmon are relatives. Our treaty promised we could continue the relationship forever. It is now up to all of us, including Congress, to ensure those promises are kept. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and I want to thank all of the witnesses for your very informative testimony. And I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each for questions. And again, I'm going to begin with me, and I would like to start with you, Chairman Choke. In your testimony, you talk about the conflicting mandates between the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act in relation to increasing pinniped populations and the stress that has been placed on our salmon species. I think this is an example of government always trying to fix its last solution, and we need to find a different way of doing this. But could you please expand on the challenges that the Nisqually tribe has faced due to the statute's conflicting mandates?
So initially, there's a clear understanding, unless we work together, we can't resolve the issue. I thank you for the question, and there's so much more to discuss in the future, and I can't share enough of how it's truly impacted the Nisqually people and what we've been up against for the last decade or so, a lot longer. Myself, I've worked at the hatcheries. I've been a fish and wildlife officer, so I've seen firsthand how they've impacted our salmon on the river. But again, thank you for that question. We'll talk more.
I think that one of the points that I hope is coming out of this hearing today is that we recognize the absolute critical importance of the tribe's involvement in finding that solution of how to fix this issue. And so I am going to challenge all of you who are here today. I know in your testimony you have provided suggestions, and Ms. Dakota, in your testimony you provided some good examples of things that can be done. All of you have done that. I think it is absolutely critical that we sit down, we put those things down on paper, we start trying to, we get to a solution for this, and all of you are very important in reaching some kind of an agreement on how we can move forward. Chairman Johnstone, your testimony was very interesting to me, and in 2022 you wrote a column titled "Marine Mammal Predation on Salmon is Out of Control." It sounds like that's kind of the understatement of the century in some ways. But you referenced a study that found that sea lions and seals eat roughly 1.2 million pounds of Chinook salmon every single year. And you also noted that tribes have reduced their fisheries by 80 to 90% in the last 4 decades. How has uninhibited pinniped growth negatively impacted tribal fishing practices throughout the region? Can you just provide some additional examples?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I've fished my entire life. Under our treaty rights, our reserved rights, I started fishing the Chehalis River in 1974. And this predation issue is also the seals, also the harbor seals, which we've lived with since time immemorial. And they're our food source. They were a clothing source. The valuable fats and oils to our people forever. So we've been presence with them forever, and the sea lions have migrated here. What happens is you have to deal with the reduced numbers of fish that are produced. That's the outmigrants. You have the adults that are returning that are also eaten by the seals and sea lions in tandem. So your fluctuation in your forecasting of your ability to reach an escapement objective and have a fishery can get compromised. They go lower. Then other impacts drive it even lower. And then our ability to have a season is diminished at that rate that they calculate in estimations, the scientists, and try to put a buffer in, but never accounted for the real true impacts. My entire 51 years of steelhead, and for instance, shows us that stock, you watch the population dynamics going like this for multiple reasons, but a true contributing factor is predation. Okay. It reduces our ability to have our fish for food and our economy.
Well, thank you for that information. And Ms. Dakota, just real quickly, could you talk about some of the successes of the 120F program and what lessons learned could be applied as Congress considers management tools to address the predation coastwide?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think one of the best example is Willamette Falls as being a successful implementation of sea lion removal. And I think one of the lessons learned from that is that it can't be applied to all rivers in the same way. And so, we have the Bonneville Dam, which is where we have a huge amount of populations, and we just don't have the capacity, the funding, the resources to really address the issue because it's a larger geographic footprint. So the landscape of the river is much different from the Willamette River, so it offers numerous issues. And so there's a number of haul-outs on the Columbia, and if the sea lions aren't going into those traps, we just can't get them. And so it's just a matter of geography.
All right, thank you for that. The chair now recognizes Ms. Hoyle for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Phillips, first of all, I just want to thank you for just, as soon as we asked you to come out, jumping on a plane, getting into Dulles at 1 o'clock last night, and getting here this morning. It really means a lot. As you know, sports fishermen are conservationists and care about the health of our rivers and healthy salmon populations. So I also want to say I appreciate your 4 very, very clear things that we can do to improve the salmon population that takes into account everything, and penniped management is critical. So what I would ask you is, what federal support do you think is needed to keep salmon populations healthy enough to support both conservation and recreational fishing opportunities?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here, so my pleasure. Funding is really a big part of this, right? We know that every year, just to implement the current program, it's extremely expensive, it's rigid, so that's what makes it expensive. If you talk to the managers who are working on this program, they'll tell you that a big obstacle is the funding part of this. The workload associated with capturing a sea lion in and around the area, the fish ladders, taking that individual to a secure location and having a veterinarian euthanize is an extremely intensive process that is underfunded just to meet the current program objectives. So I would say that is the largest portion. Obviously, at the state level, too, we have heavily involvement from the state. As you're probably very aware, there's financial challenges both with Oregon and Washington right now, and their commitment and priorities haven't made this a large priority for moving forward. So we hope that'll be a bigger priority for both Washington and Oregon, and also a federal investment at that level.
So would you agree that that in addition to more funding, appropriate staffing at the federal level, which is critical, that more flexibility in this program, which maybe would reduce bureaucracy, have things more streamlined, cost less per sea lion euthanized, would be a good approach?
Absolutely. It is a, we're learning as we've went along here, and we know that the work that you've done over the past decades has really provided us with an avenue forward. But I think there's a lot of work that can be done, and certainly the bullet points that myself and others here have laid out, I think is a good opportunity or possibility for us to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And Ms. Dakota, Section 120F authority allows up to 1,400 California sea lions and 217 stellar sea lions to be removed annually, but permitting is used far less than that. What is your impression of why?
Thank you for the question. Part of the reason is just the fact that sea lions are very smart and clever, and they have this learned behavior. And so if we have these methods to deter them that aren't working, we need these lethal deterrents. But really it comes down to, again, what I said earlier, it's really about the funding for more traps, specifically at Bonneville Dam, and more crew to be able to get all of these sea lions out of the system. So it's part of the issue is not the fact that we don't have traps and hauling area locations out there. It's just the fact that these sea lions are very smart. They know when our hazing crews are coming, and then they come right back as soon as we leave. So the fact is that we just need more alternative solutions. So one of the things that we recommended is how can we develop innovative technologies to deter sea lions from coming into the Columbia River at all. So really looking at potentially things that can happen in the estuary to prevent them coming and migrating into the Columbia River itself.
Thank you. And I also want to say, Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for your heartfelt testimony. When my grandfather, my mother's family came over from Ireland, they were fishermen, and at that time, there were very, very strong salmon stocks and fishing stocks. The fishing industry in Ireland is devastated, and salmon in Ireland are on the verge of extinction because politicians had bigger fish to fry than preserving the health of our rivers and of those fish. And the salmon in Ireland is a mythical creature that holds all the world's knowledge, and that fish is nearly extinct. And to see that happening here in the Pacific Northwest as well, I think it's important, as you've said, it's our responsibility to ensure that we provide and make it a priority to ensure that these fish are able to be there for our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren. So I just want to thank all of you for your work and testimony. It's really, really powerful.
The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you so much to the witnesses for being here. This is an important topic. To me, it's an important topic. To the committee, for someone from a state where the only salmon you're going to find is at a grocery store or at a restaurant. I have this fascination with salmon, and it's because I've had opportunities to understand better what salmon means to culture, to tradition, and really to, as an outdoorsman, an iconic species that has really kind of captured my eye and made me want to work along with you to help make sure we have great stocks of salmon going forward. I've had the opportunity to release fish in the Columbia River below the Chief Joseph Dam. I've been to the Nisqually. I've even seen work in the forest in Washington where culverts are being replaced with better fish passages. I know there's a tremendous amount of work that's been done in this area, and I know that tribes are I think, leading the way in the work that's being done, and we desperately need to rely on your help more as we work on salmon. So, Chairman Choate, one thing that I was intrigued by when I visited Nisqually was, first off, the reason you were working so hard on salmon recovery was because you wanted to have a more traditional diet with salmon for the health of your tribal members, which I thought was a noble goal. Y'all took very pragmatic approaches, which you've outlined in your testimony. You've got the hatchery, you've done all the estuary rehabilitation, like trying to do everything you can, even limiting your own fishing season to try to help. But then as we floated down that boat to the delta and it was just sea lion heads across the mouth of the river, it was a very informative visual that you've done all you can do, but you're limited in doing what you really need to do to have the fish stocks that you need. What's all the time, all the money, all the effort that's been invested in the Nisqually salmon recovery work, what's going to happen if Congress doesn't provide you the rest of the tools you need to manage the pinnipeds in the river and in the delta?
Thank you for that question, Chairman. You know, just as our elder here at Johnstone explained that, you know, if it continues that we will not have salmon for future generations. Salmon is not only a food resource for our people, but, you know, with certain mannerism, it's also used for medication as well in certain cases, fish oils and whatnot. You know, some of the traditional values stem in that sense. You know, I heard our senator state she does not eat salmon, but, you know, it is implemented as medication as well. So that's something to take in consideration. But that's the bottom line, is we're gonna lose our populations, we're gonna lose our culture, our heritage, what the Nisqually people are. We are the people of the water, people of the grass. And that's one thing we want to continue throughout the next 7 generations.
And I appreciate you bringing in the discussion, the treaty rights that you have that mention salmon. And Chairman Johnstone, I appreciate your testimony as well. And you suggested we need an ecosystem-wide congressional fix. How would you recommend Congress approach rebalancing ESA and MMPA so that we can get that fix?
Yeah, I think to the member, that's the term of reference means we have to look at all the complete ecosystem and what are the limiting factors to recovery. We're talking about recovery of our salmon stocks. We have 15 threatened and endangered species inside Puget Sound. And then we have 3 proposed stocks on the coast now in an area that is quote unquote pristine because all the federal property. Now we're threatened here that tips the balance of scale. The scales are tipped against us. So we have to look at the total picture, then look at each component of salmon recovery and the limiting factors, of which there are the avians and the seals and sea lions that we're specifically addressing here, but there are those other components. And then this is what we've done since time immemorial, when we harvested only which we needed. And then you come into this regulated world, court cases, laws and codes like the Magnuson-Stevens Acts and so forth. And then the limitations are authorizations to those responsible to uphold our treaty right, our way of life, and our existence. And so, you know, that's a big, broad, what are those impediments to looking at the health of these ecosystems? Weave through all of that and work as we are to figure out how is that pathway to recovery under ESA, not only of the salmon populations, but the southern resident killer whale. Then you have this other authorization called the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which is what we're here for, those two things combined, and other authorities and authorizations and responsibility for the federal government to our treaty protected rights. So, I mean, that's a big, broad envelope. Our mission is to weave through that, like you are giving this opportunity today through our testimony, and by your own observation to come out and visit us, which I would encourage you to come out to our 20-member tribes, to the Columbia River, to these places where you see the dynamics of our life ways being diminished by all of these rules, regulations, laws, and codes when those populations are coming down, and our treaties are hollow without those resources. Where when we are held to MSY or the conservation necessity, we only share that number of fish available once we meet the conservation objective. A number that says we can harvest 20,000 coho in the Chehalis system. Then we share equally with the state of Washington. When that number goes down where we no longer can share the harvestable surplus, the seals and sea lions are still eating that resource. They are not controlled. They don't know how to read the Magnuson Act and the Sustainable Fishery Act, and they are smart. You think a sea line's smart, seals are far more smarter than sea lions. My own personal observation, 51 years off reservation, my entire life on reservation. That ecosystem base that we have to look at that holistic approach and what can we do? How can we channel through all of these things that have been brought to us who signed a treaty. In the language of the treaty, when you read Isaac Stevenson's, that you always have fish for your frying pan. That's the Lummi Nation. You know, and languages that we have a lot of commonality in. Those marine mammals, the seals in particular, were in our everyday diet. The smokehouses were still full when I was a child in the 50s.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Madam Chair has been overly generous here, and I'll just wrap up and say I'm sure the seals and the sea lions appreciate all your efforts because they've benefited greatly, but it's time they give back a little bit, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Randall for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am so blessed to come from a district where salmon are an integral part of our environment, our culture, our economy in Washington's 6th District. We have recreation and sports fishers. We have environmentalists that see salmon for our canary in the coal mine, and 12 federally recognized tribes with usual and accustomed territory that overlaps with the 6th Congressional District. Many of whom, as we have heard from our speakers today, depend on salmon for the key role that they play in not just subsistence, but culture and our greater ecosystem. I feel very lucky to have worked alongside tribal leaders for the last 7 years in my public service life, because tribes are more often than not leading the conservation efforts with fewer resources, funding, and staff, then you need to do the work. In Washington, our co-management approach often means that while you are co-managing with the state, you are carrying the lion's share of the science and the work on the ground. Chairman Choke, in your testimony, you reiterated Nisqually's reserved but not received right to fish at your usual and accustomed places. Of course, to meet these treaty-protected fishing rights, there have to be salmon to fish. I know that you have made financial investments from Nisqually, large financial investments, as well as time to recover salmon. I was with one of your fishery scientists just last week at the Puget Sound Partnership Recovery Caucus meeting. And in your testimony, you mentioned that the tribe has restored more than 900 acres of Nisqually estuary, among the largest projects on the West Coast. The tribe has done very impressive work, and it's time for the federal government to hold up our end of the bargain. Chairman, I wonder if you could tell us more about the main challenges that you see facing salmon populations and what Congress can do and should do to ensure that our treaty obligations are being met.
Thank you for that question. You know, it's a good thing to note here that what we're talking about is continuing efforts, working together as tribal leaders, as governmental leaders, you know, at all three levels, the federal, the state, and the tribal. We can continue these efforts and work together and look at the alternatives of, you know, how we can, like I stated, it's not our mission to initially eliminate the pinnipede issue. It's how can we manage it in a sense that it's more feasible to everybody. I mean, there's other alternatives, and I think as long as we continue to work together, we can all make this happen. So again, thank you for that question.
Wonderful, thank you. And I just have to take a moment to say I really look forward to the unveiling of Washington State's new statue in Statuary Hall, which will honor Billy Frank Jr., you know, one of the co-founders of the National Indian Fisheries Commission, but also a leader, Nisqually tribal member, and a leader of the fishing wars that have gone so far to uphold tribal treaty rights in Washington. Mr. Johnstone, thank you so much for being here today. It's always good to see you. You know, I represent a unique place, including, you know, the Quinault Nation, and, you know, our land is not the same as everyone's. Not everyone has a chance to experience the special place that we live, and I hope that more members of the committee will. We recently went to Alaska, and I got to see some of their salmon habitat challenges. In the remaining time, I wonder if you could tell us more about the holistic approach to salmon recovery, one that includes hatchery management, harvest regulation, hydropower impacts, habitat restoration, that tribes have been leading.
Yeah, thank you. Can you just repeat that? My hearing's not as good as it should be.
You, the previous question was about the holistic approach, and the holistic approach that you lead from the Fisheries Commission side also includes hatchery management and harvest regulation, hydropower impacts, habitat restoration. Can you say more about the vast needs of that holistic approach?
Well, I can, if I understand the question right. We, as an organization, we have 20 commissioners from those 20 tribes, and we're well engaged in the habitat discussion. We do serve a function in the hatchery world, mostly through, we took over Fish and Wildlife's fish health long ago, We work with the hatcheries on the health of the stocks. But in the arena that we're in, we have an environmental section, and we have populated a committee, environmental policy committee. So everything is scrubbed through those subcommittees, and we work on all those issues, including we have a client scientist that helped us get ready for, everybody wrote their adaptation plans and things like that. All of those supported by Congress. So it's key that, and we have strong support out of the House Interior Environment and related agencies. Across the aisle, we've had real strong support since the days of Congressman Norm Dix, and we have and Congressman Tom Cole and others that have really championed and are behind the agreements that we signed with the United States and the responsibility that goes along with that to work together to accomplish. We are the partners in the solution to a lot of these answers that we seek. We're fully engaged on all levels. Everything that we do through our organization and what we've populated that comes through there are key and important to the tribes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnstone, and thanks for your generosity, Madam Chair.
I'm now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Dakota, Mr. Johnstone, and Chairman Koch for describing for us the importance of the fisheries and the salmon population to your cultures and the treaty obligations. I think that's really helpful for us as we're looking at this, that it's not just a scientific question or a question of biology. That's been really helpful for me today. Now I feel like maybe I shouldn't have told you I don't really like to eat fish. That was, I don't think I come from water people. I think my people are people of wind and dust. So I eat cows and I've never developed a taste for fish, but I do like to catch them. And so, Mr. Phillips, I want to ask you, we talked earlier in the first panel about the restrictions on commercial fishing because of the pressures on these fisheries. Could you talk a little bit about what the regulations are on sport fishing because of the regulation of the fisheries?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, you really can't separate them. We have policy where we share between recreational and recreational and commercial fisheries. We obviously have a process for sharing between non-tribal and tribal fishers. But, you know, the reality is that our resources have been diminished to the point of constraining all fisheries. If you look at the number of days on the water where we've been open in recent years, it's a fraction of what we've had not that many decades ago. And those challenges are continuing. We have, as you heard, many stocks listed under the Endangered Species Act. The complexity of management is such that one stock is going to constrain fisheries across the coast. And that stock can be one that's very low abundance. So opportunities associated with making sure that we get enough of that stock back to that individual river constrained fisheries up and down the coast. And it has had a significant negative impact on coastal communities, tribal communities, and you know, we're hopeful that this approach and this strategy to address at least the marine mammal predation part of this can provide us some options moving forward.
Thank you. And that brings me back to a question I asked our first panelist. I'm just going to give all of you a chance to answer really quickly, starting with you, Ms. Dakota. Can you see any reason why we shouldn't expand the authorities from the Columbia River Basin and lift the requirement that we prove that an individual pinniped is a bad actor before we allow control of the predators?
You know, these are tough conversations to have. We acknowledge that. But in all, you know, from all points of view, I think that the Marine Mammal Protection Act worked in the Northwest relative to pinnipeds. And, we don't have predation on marine mammals, pinnipeds. For the most part, the natural predators have been removed. And so you heard Mr. Roush talk earlier about upwards of 250,000 California sea lions off our coast in our rivers. We need a tool. We need a tool to be able to address that portion of this challenge. No doubt, we need to continue to work in the other areas where we know that habitat restoration and mitigation for lost, for hydropower and other challenges will continue to exist. But this, from our lens, is something that we need to address now, and we think it has a real opportunity to provide a meaningful outcome to improve conditions for salmon and also everyone who relies on them.
Thank you. I agree. And Ms. Dakota, in your testimony, you talked about having tools on the shelf, but you felt like you couldn't reasonably use them. Do you want to address that as well?
Yes, thank you for the question. Regarding the amendment to answer yes, we specifically around the tools, that question is great because we need to expand the geographic scope of the MMPA to allow for area-based management, and this will address some of the issues I talked about in my testimony around the Bonneville Dam issue and that bottleneck opposed to the Willamette River. And what this would do is it would get us quicker and more comprehensive responses to any emerging predation issues. So as we talked about, there's a lot of learned behavior. The hope is that we disrupt that learned behavior so that it doesn't continue. So just simply removing these animals will not do that. We need other opportunities and possibilities potentially that NOAA can provide in terms of a roadmap to address and look at.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnstone, Chairman Choke, is there anything you want to quickly add in the next 10 seconds?
Thank you for the question. I think it's just our commitment to work through this process, be diligent, collaborate, find those pathways. That's where our message would be out of the Northwest Indian Fish Commission and the 20 member tribes. Important that ability to the other member tribes of our organization, in my opinion, have as their vital testimony, their story be heard. We're a vehicle, as the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, develop those policies, and I can speak to them, but the voices of those 20 member tribes are what drive us to do the work, and that's a loud voice. That's our time immemorial voice.
Thank you.
And we need to be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Glusenkamp-Perez for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the chairwoman. Chairman Choke, in your testimony, you mentioned the need for Congress to streamline Section 120 process to allow managers to remove pinnipeds by means not limited to chemical euthanasia. Could you provide some examples or strategies other than traps and chemical euthanasia that you believe would be more effective in removing or deterring sea lions?
Thank you for that question. Initially, it's something that we need to continue to take a look at and see how we can evaluate the situation and, as I stated earlier, come up with less lethal means, I guess you could say. I've always stressed the point, how can we actually, resolve the issue with our pinnipeds and the harbor seals? One of the things we need to take in consideration is the simple fact that, in Alaska, they do harvest such animals. So can we work together with our brothers and sisters up north to do what we've done in traditional ways and barter with our brothers and sisters up north, and and their salmon abundance up there. But initially, it's collaboration, working with Chairman Johnstone and our state and federal partners to come up with a resolution to that. So, Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. Mr. Phillips, I'm curious to hear just some brainstorming. I've been chewing on this for a while and hearing a lot from my community about this. And I'm curious to hear what you might think about a permit auction process or a lottery, some kind of guide, some process where local fishermen and tribal members could bid on permits to assist with lethal removals. I've had so many people tell me they would pay good money. And with funds coming far short in our rural schools, another revenue source, and a broader tie to the community that this is a bigger part of our life than just eating. What are your thoughts? I understand there are a lot of points to flesh out here, but I wanted to bring it up in a possible step in the right direction.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one, but I'm sure there were folks would line up to participate in that. I think we need to be creative. I think we need to find tools to address the challenge. I also think that we need to be really careful, make sure we're investing in good science to monitor the outcomes of any type of programs that we implement or decide to implement. And that clearly is going to be the foundation of how we move forward. But, I would certainly support being creative and coming up with unique ideas to.
We got unique ideas over here.
I still can't even harvest an elk, so I probably wouldn't be very good at it. But.
With the remaining time we have, Ms. Dakota, excuse me. I appreciate you being here to speak directly on the complex challenges to mitigating issues with the Bonneville Dam. But I'd like to hear more about your perspective on expanding Section 120F permits to the tributaries and how this might help deter sea lions more effectively.
Yes, thank you for the question. Absolutely. I think what we see on top of the bottlenecks is these confluence of animals around tributaries coming into the main stem of the Columbia River. So I think the more we can, again, this is learned behavior, the more we can disrupt this learned behavior earlier at the, near the estuary and coming into the Columbia River, that will prevent them from coming all the way into the lower river and into Bonneville Dam.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I heard is this is learned behavior, and you have to, without any clear feedback loop here, being direct and being, I think, respectful and communicating, not with, as Mr. Johnstone was saying, they don't read the laws, but to communicate more clearly. So thank you for your insight. Thank you for your work, and I'll yield back my remaining 11 seconds.
The chair now recognizes Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to point out something I noticed in Ms. Glusenkamp's poster earlier there, that seal contrasted with a, what's that, a Toyota whatever? Okay. A more accurate description would be a 427 Shelby Cobra, similar in weight and length, so that might make a more interesting poster next time too. So anyway, thank you. I appreciate the conversation here. Thank you for our panelists for your time and travel on this. And Ms. Dakota, I said that correctly?
Dakota.
One more time?
Dakota.
Okay, I didn't hear her say that. All right, I'm just trying to say it French, I guess. So, all right, good. Thank you. What we've seen, again, in the Willamette is that a dramatic drop in the steelhead extinction from 89 to 11% is the stat I have because of the targeted sea lion removal. And I got nothing against the sea lion per se, but, obviously we have a big problem here. And so in the time we've had so far today, do you care to elaborate more on how more of this approach could be brought across the whole, much more of this whole corridor from really USA and North America as well. How much more can we be applying this? Do you have more thoughts on how this could help the populations up and down more of the coast?
Yes, thank you for the question. So, the problem is you can't have a blanket approach for an entire system or even the West Coast. There's so many, again, the geographic footprint and the landscape of each of these rivers and tributaries are vastly different from each other. And so you really need targeted approaches for each tributary and in the main stem, it's really just enormous in terms of the amount of water coming through, all of the, it's a series of reservoirs. It's not a free-flowing river anymore. And so you have this opportunity for these sea lions to be there. And so there's just more space for them to haul out, and they just don't get trapped as much as they do. So again, some of our recommendations are for, for Congress to look to our good partner, NOAA, to see if there's strategies or options or offer a roadmap that we can consider moving forward. And then similarly, to work with other agencies. We've heard that the Army Corps has been doing some work in the Midwest around addressing invasive species at locks and dams. And so how can we take, issues or problems or solutions in other areas and potentially apply them to ours?
Yeah, and that makes good sense. We have an issue on the Klamath there where initiative to put more barriers on the irrigation systems there for, fish screening has been lagging, and so we have farmers and ranchers getting into more hot water over inadvertent takes of a very low amount of endangered fish, and yet we have this problem here of mass amounts being taken by sea lions or even outside of our international water jurisdiction by just mass amounts of fishing. So I wish we could do more to have a better rapport with agriculture on the very, very limited amount of risk ag causes versus the greater risk elsewhere. And part of that, as I mentioned in the Klamath, is hastening the process of getting more fish screens in place on the intakes they have on the Klamath for those districts. So do you have any thoughts on what changes we should be making to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which would give tribes more opportunity to balance the mammal populations, or pinnipeds? That's the word of the day. I'm with you on that one. That's a new one to me. To balance that population with the great effort on the salmon restoration. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. We, again, in my recommendations or my testimony, we support amending the MMPA really to extend this area-based management authority, not just to the Willamette River, but all the way up the Puget Sound, the West Coast, because what we see is, these animals aren't stagnant. They're coming into their system, but they don't stay there. They go back to the West Coast, up and down the West Coast. And so the larger area we can manage for, the better we'll have success.
All right, thank you, appreciate it. I still like that word pinniped, so I'm going to have to
kind of
commit
fun.
that. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And sounds like some good ideas there. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Baumgartner for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to wave onto the committee to speak today, and to you, our panel of experts, for coming and testifying on this important subject. I represent a significant portion of Washington State, and one that includes some of the largest fish-bearing streams in the nation, including parts of the Columbia River and the Snake River. And I know how important salmon, steelhead, and other fish populations are to our ecosystem, the health of our communities, and to the cultural heritage of our tribes. And I also appreciate the work of the Upper Columbia Basin tribes in Eastern Washington, including the Colville, Spokane, and Kalispel tribes, and for leading the way in reintroducing salmon north of the Grand Coulee Dam. Now, I am not a tribal member, but I did have the great privilege when I was a boy of spending 2 years playing basketball with a group of Nez Perce Indians in Lapway, which was close to my boyhood home. And so twice a week I would drive down to Lapway. And my father was a forestry professor that did a lot of forestry work on tribal areas. And I've been at salmon fish bakes with the Nez Perce, and I know how important it is to tribes. It's important to everybody, particularly the tribes. And I believe that one of the biggest areas of opportunity to collaborate across party lines is to get serious about controlling our sea lion populations. These guys are a problem. These mammals are one of the biggest impediments to fish restoration on the West Coast. The average sea lion can eat up to 35 pounds of fish a day. They are a danger to West Coast fisheries and eat hundreds of thousands of our salmon, steelhead, and other fish every year. And I think one of the reasons that people get so frustrated with government is that everybody knows the sea lions are a problem. There's too many of them, and they need to be removed and reduced in populations. And everybody asks, what is taking so long? Salmon are so important to our region, and these sea lions are a discrete challenge that we can reduce. And it's nothing against the sea lions. Salmon are tasty. If I was out there, I'd eat them as well too. But we have to give folks the tools to reduce these populations. Originally protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, sea lions have expanded precipitously along the West Coast for the last 50 years, with the total populations estimated to have grown from 100,000 in the 1970s up to 300,000 along the West Coast today. In 2018, Congress enacted the Endangered Salmon Predation Act to remove some of these seals. However, as of May 2025, stakeholders eligible under law have removed a total of 229 sea lions from our rivers and estuaries. Again, there are too damn many sea lions eating too many fish. They need to be reduced. We need to have the tools. And as somebody that knows the taxpayers of Washington State and the taxpayers of America are spending a ton of money to try to help salmon populations, it's extremely frustrating to me that folks do not have the tools to need to do what they're doing. And so I thank the committee for this important hearing. I thank this important group of people coming today. And I hope next year I will be able to come back and there will have the tools. And no offense to these guys, but a good number of them need to be killed and removed. And I hope that happens. And what we do today leads to having the tools to do that. We need less sea lions and more salmon. And with that, I yield back. Thank you for allowing me to participate, Madam Chair.
Thank you for coming to participate and giving us the line of the day. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, for your valuable testimony, as well as for the members who participated and worked to bring more attention to this extremely important matter. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, December 8th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for your responses. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.